Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today I'm reviewing Empyre Avengers number 2. So, I think I made the mistake of ordering this whole series, and I never really personally felt the need to, um, I guess we'll say, cancel that subscription, even though I really didn't enjoy the last issue, because it's worth reviewing either way, and it's another look at Empyre, which has definitely been languishing. But on the other hand, I really enjoyed the Empyre X-Men crossover, so you never know what we can get with this one. And this even has the same writer this week as the X-Men crossover with Jim Zub. Carlos Magno does the artwork, and Espen Grundidjern does the coloring. Overall, the artwork team is really on point this book. I think the artwork's a lot more stronger, more interesting looking, and better colored in this particular book. We get a lot of really cool sights of the Savage Land and various elements of the Savage Land beyond just the typical jungle forest. We kind of go to this astral plane thingy as well. It's quite interesting. It's cool. Dr. Nemesis is still part of this character storyline, but he really doesn't do much. And there's interesting little bits of other character work going on between the Kree and the Skrulls, which is kind of cool, and we aren't really getting enough of in Empyre. But overall, it's still pretty dull. It's still one of the weaker Empyre tie-ins out there. It's a shame that this one got made while others were cancelled, but I digress. There are elements of it I liked a lot more than the previous issue, and I definitely see the value in this book, though I don't think I'd recommend it on the whole. So that's pretty much my spoiler-free review. Let's get into what the book's all about. So we open on a bunch of very cool shots, kind of giving us a sense of what's going on in the world of Earth under the Katati invasion. There's battles going on in Wakanda. We get a cool shot of these dogs of war that were like formerly Wakanda secret police, but now this loyal mercenary force that work for T'Challa. The Warriors Free are fighting off Katati in Little Asgard. Captain America is fighting with soldiers in Washington, D.C. This is where the artwork's really on point. Meanwhile, Dr. Nemesis and Luke Cage find this plant-based villain called, Plant Man, who's been clearly corrupted by the Katati and is working with them. He summons a bunch of soldiers that are like all these weird plant growth things ready to fight. In Mexico, Wonder Man and Quicksilver, along with Mockingbird, are trying to get these Kree and Skrull to stop from killing each other. And that's the interesting part I was talking about earlier, where there's like this real debate between the Kree and the Skrulls over like whether this alliance is real, whether it's an alliance of convenience to deal with the Katati. One of the Skrulls can't believe that 1,000-year war can just come to an end, but another Kree is very loyal to the idea and calls them traitors. They start fighting, and basically the Avengers are trying to hold them apart. And the rest of the book is pretty much devoted to the Savage Land, where Shanna, love interest of Khazar, has been completely corrupted by the Katati and made into one of their plant clones, while her mind is kind of kept dormant under Katati control. So Wanda sort of goes into her mind and tries to Raphael saying, "Hey, Arden, don't worry, I'll behave." Subject to the comic, well, whatever. I don't even know. There's not so much to talk about in comparison. So a battle happens outside of Shana and in the jungle at the same time. It kind of just goes on, and then Khazar gets stabbed near the end, right after bringing Shana back from Katati control. Now, there's not much to this story, but I will say the artwork really ramps up at the end. I've never quite seen the Savage Land quite as well drawn and as interesting as in this book, but the plot's very mediocre, and it very much is just like aliens invading. That being said, this is like a better alien invasion story than something like Secret Invasion, which is a very comparable sort of uh, like story, I'd say, even in terms of how it functions as a Marvel crossover event and stuff. But this is more polished. This gives us a better sense of like the struggle on Earth, which is nice for Empyre in general. Um, it's got some cool moments, especially if you're a fan of Khazar and the Savage Land. I think you would enjoy this book if that were the case. Raphael's saying the cover gives me Justice League Dark vibes. It really does with Man Thing on it. But Scarlet Witch, Doctor Druid, and Black Knight all have cool moments in this story, and on the whole, it wasn't that bad. Certainly a lot better than the previous Avengers book. Empire number zero, or Avengers number zero, Empyre Avengers number zero, is definitely like the strongest of those, I'd say. But they're all just okay. Something that bugs me though is there's a house or an X of Swords insert in the middle of this book, and that's fine in and of itself, but it just seems real questionable to me that there's basically 2 pages in this book, one of the Empyre reading order in all the issues, and one of the X of Swords reading order in all those issues, in the same tie-in. And that feels almost cheap to me, and really gets into how much Marvel's cluttering these events. I think people would have given Empyre a lot more benefit of the doubt early on, even if it didn't deserve it, if Marvel hasn't gone so nuts with these events in the last several years. And I think that's Empyre's biggest problem, because it is showing more interesting colors, and a book like this kind of really gets into the potential, because however briefly, we do get a sense of like there's a real debate within the Kree and the Skrull, and there's something going on here. And I really think this story had potential to be truly interesting and to show a new direction for what I feel are very overly relied on alien forces in the world of Marvel. And maybe this could have been something truly different for the Kree and the Skrull. Maybe it can still represent that by the time Empyre is all said and done. I have my doubts. But I think there was a real potential here that ultimately this book didn't really live up to on the whole, which is truly disappointing. Especially given that once again we have some really great artwork. This kind of artwork that leans very heavily towards realism, which is kind of funny because we're going into like psychic planes and dealing with a jungle in Antarctica. But it's great. It's polished. It's fun. Hello, Adrian. Thanks for joining us. I was just saying how I wasn't overly sold on this book. There's one story left, or one issue left in Empyre Avengers with Black Knight. We'll see if it does anything different, because I do have that book on order, but on the whole, I don't think I'd recommend this tie-in or this book particularly. I think if you like the Savage Land, you might appreciate this book, even just from a pure art perspective, though it does some interesting things, but that's it. And I think Empyre's even has its own Savage Land tie-in that might be better than this, like with the Savage Avengers or something like that, which maybe even follows up on some of this content and fleshes it out a little. Or maybe it was cancelled. Yeah, there is like a Savage Avengers book that probably gets into this stuff. I think it's already come out. I have not read it, but I don't think there's a lot to it. It's a cool idea with like plant aliens invading and them taking advantage of various green spots on Earth, the Savage Land being a prime example of that. I think that's really interesting, but that's one of those things where if this happened on the world of DC, it would be so much cooler, because you'd have the green, and you'd have Swamp Thing, and you'd have Poison Ivy, and you'd have lots of weird little locations on DC, like in Marvel, that would be very reactive to a plant-based society invading. That includes lots of random little islands, but even just, I don't know, there's so many interesting ideas. Even just sites of the green, you could involve the red or the rot in some interesting way. I was thinking about that the Katati could potentially be a little more interesting because they have Swamp Thing and Poison Ivy in the world of DC as compared to Marvel. That's one thing that I was really feeling heavily in this book. Even like something like Kamandi could be kind of cool in that sort of setting. Adrian was saying there are some comics I'm getting to think are interesting, like Nomen Omen. I don't know what you're referring to there, but Raphael is saying hopefully we can get a type an event with an Illuminati type villain group versus the heroes or other bad guys. I think that would be interesting. I think a big problem with this is it's really falling into the tropes of alien invasion type stories or something like Age of Ultron, and it becomes very samey very quickly because of that. This Avengers book is a prime example of it, but it's a real problem in the Empyre Core series as well. Speaking of which, next up for us to review will be Empyre number 5. I unfortunately don't think I have enough time to get into this one today, so we'll have to leave that for another day. Then we got a couple more books after that, including at least one DC book. It's been weird like that, but I think we're slowly starting to catch up and return to a balance between those two groups going forward. So stay tuned for all of that. Thanks for watching this review, and thanks for joining me, Raphael and Adrian. Adrian was saying, I was reading an article where McFarlane was talking about if he did a Spawn Spider-Man crossover, he would want to run the show. Yeah, I could see why people would be excited about that. I'm not the biggest Spawn fan personally. I'd just say that as having never really gotten into it at any age. But anything can be cool or interesting. Even a seasoned writer artist like McFarlane can do a good job with it. Thanks for joining me, Raphael and Adrian. Hopefully we'll have more time to talk in the future, but I only had so much time today anyways. So I appreciate everyone who's joined us in the 2 streams, and I'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.